Good evening. The study session for the Wayne Westland Community School Board of Education is now brought to order on Monday, May 21st, 2018 at 6:03 p.m. On behalf of the Board of Education, I would like to welcome everyone. Your attendance this evening reflects your interest in local education and is greatly appreciated. We're going to start with item number 371.18, Pledge of Allegiance. Dr. Thomas, will you all lead us off?
Pledge allegiance
to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. Moving on to item number 372.18, roll call. Ms. Hines?
Mr. Cox?
present.
Mr. Buckaloo excused. Dr. Weaver?
I'm here.
Ms. Hines here. Ms. Madison?
Present.
Ms. Medill?
I'm here.
Ms. Walker?
Here.
Let the record show 6.
Thank you. Quorum is present. So before we get started, I just wanted to send well wishes to Mr. Buckaloo on a speedy recovery. He's at home recovering from some surgery. He wanted everyone to know that he's doing well and that he's trying to return swiftly, but I told him to take his time. We need him to be 100% when he comes back, and we don't need him rushing. And I know that this is a busy time, and so everyone wants to be a part of the festivities that's coming up, but he wants you to know that he's doing well, and we want him to know that our thoughts are with him. So moving on, we're going to move on to item number 373.18, citizen comments. Agenda items only. Do we have anyone in the audience? No? Okay. Moving on to item number 374.18, instructional rounds. Ms. Peck. That's you.
Good evening. I was debating where I should stand, if I should do it from there, and then decided I'm going to stand here so that I can see everyone. Tonight, I am going to speak with you about some of the work that we've been doing this last year and how it relates to the overall strategic planning that we've been going through this past year and some of our plans going into next year. Today, I want to speak with you about the student learning and growth through adult learning and growth, and I provided a little packet of information for you to go through with me. So just to kind of frame things for you, I wanted to just briefly remind or introduce you to the Common Core State Standards. As we all know that Michigan adopted the Common Core State Standards. The Common Core is what students need to know and be able to do. So it's what they need to know and be able to do. The curriculum is how students will learn it. We're going to start with the what. Because it shifted significantly when the Common Core State Standards became our standard. And I know that Ms. Curry will also speak to that as well as the curriculum. The how has also changed as a result of the Common Core State Standards. We shifted our curriculum already, and we're moving some other curriculum over, and I know Jen will talk with you more about that, but we were still missing some things. And I'm going to continue talking. The Common Core State Standard, where's mine?
Oh, they got it for you.
Are they clicking?
Yeah, it was sitting
Hit
down
me.
here.
They got their back.
The Common Core State Standards and rigor. That's when I said we were missing something. We were missing that rigor piece that the CCSS demands of us. The foundation, in fact, of Common Core State Standards is rigor. So the rigor creates that environment where students demonstrate learning at those high levels. That's one of the purposes of rigor and the Common Core State Standards. Authentic rigor includes high expectations from our teachers to our students, increased support to the students, and increased demonstration of learning by the students. And I think it's important to note that piece because it ties so well with some of the other elements that we're working on this year, as well as things that we've been doing up until now. I know that the board is very aware of the work that we've done on the 5 dimensions of teaching and learning. That is our instructional framework, which also feeds into our evaluation system for teachers, which is all about continuous improvement. But one of the elements within the 5 dimensions, and I just shared with you one page of the matrix. This is the matrix that we use for the evaluation piece. If you look at this matrix, you notice on the very right-hand side, you've got a column called distinguished. And in our evaluation tool, distinguished means highly effective. And teachers are striving to be highly effective teachers, and as we all are as educators. But one of the common items that you notice in that distinguished column over and over again is that the students are demonstrating their learning, and they are demonstrating that learning.
Hold on 1 second, Rebecca. Everything is in this packet right here. So you have your first packet, and then if you take the paper clip off that packet, right next to it, right behind it is. So you have 3 packets, one for her presentation, one for Mrs. Curry's, and one for Dr. Townsend.
Could we start over again? I have to put all my packets
I'm so sorry. I was not
So the
reading
next
my
one.
audience very well.
No problem.
A lot
There
of
you go.
paperwork in front of us.
us. All right, so I was just kind of referring to this 5D rubric. And one of the items that indicates that a teacher is very highly effective is that their students are demonstrating that they are applying that knowledge within the classroom, and they're demonstrating it through their learning. Taking responsibility for their learning and higher order thinking, and always answering why and how and what if. Those are all indicators that a student is learning at a very high rigor. I know that everybody here knows this, but I just want to remind everybody, this is how we're measured. We are measured by MSTEP, NWEA, and SAT. That's our benchmarks for the state determining and us deciding, are we moving in the right direction with our students? Are our students achieving at the level that we know that they can achieve? Every single one of those measures that we just talked about are measuring the depth of knowledge that our children have in the core content areas. So we're going to talk about depth of knowledge more throughout this, but depth of knowledge is not reciting or regurgitating information, because that's kind of what we have Google for now. Depth of knowledge really is talking about how are we thinking about thinking. And that's where we're being assessed at. That's what our standards are assessing us at. So of course, that's where we need to be teaching, and our children need to be learning. So we did a little bit of a gap analysis, and we were trying to determine what and how we are teaching and what that impact has on our test scores. Because remember, we're all being measured on these same standards, right? We identified that our rigor, specifically our depth of knowledge, was not meeting the expectations of the CCSS, and it was reflected in our test scores. So that's the area that we're going to move towards. And before we started moving, we said, what are we going to do about it? So I had to ask myself the question when I first started thinking about this: what is rigor, and how do we know if we have it, right? I mean, it's like air. We're breathing it right now, but we can't see it. We came across the Hess Cognitive Rigor Matrix, and I'm going to draw your attention to another packet, another item in the packet. This one's kind of blue and gold. I'm sorry for the Michigan State fans, but this is a little blue and gold, thank you. And this Hess Cognitive Rigor Matrix, it does 2 things for us in the world of rigor. It applies what's called the Webb's depth of knowledge, which is the rigor, and that is right across the top. You see DOK level 1, recall and reproduction, DOK level 2, skills and concepts, DOK level 3, strategic thinking and reasoning, and DOK Level 4, Extended Thinking. So those are the depth of knowledge. The other thing that the HES Cognitive Rigor Matrix has that we really liked and we felt was very important in helping us develop and increase our students' rigor is also looking at Bloom's taxonomy, their cognitive process dimensions. And those are listed along the left side. So that is the cognitive ability to remember, to understand, to apply, to analyze, to evaluate, and to create. So what we have now is a tool through which we can all work together on understanding how our students are remembering, understanding, applying, etc., and then look at it across the continuum for our depth of knowledge. And you can imagine DOK 1, that's not a lot of depth. That's that stuff that we're using Google for a little bit. Now understand, we've got DOK level 1s happening in every classroom, in every meeting, in every conversation. There's some level of DOK 1 because that's recalling and reproducing. You have to know before you can go, right? So there's going to always be levels 1 and 2, but we're aspiring to increase our levels 3 and 4 in our classrooms on a regular basis. And I'm going to talk more about that in a minute. I just wanted you to understand how this is helping us develop our rigor and our Common Core State standards. So now we get to the name of my presentation, which is, go back one for me, Dr. Holt, Student Learning and Growth Through Educator Learning and Growth. What we have been focusing on this year, and we will continue to focus on, are principals right now, because they are our instructional leaders. And sometimes in the whirlwind, in the heat of the day of the school with so many things that are going on, sometimes we can forget that our principals are truly our instructional leaders. They are the experts in the field, and they are in the field working with our teachers every day on supporting their practice in their classroom. So we are working right now with principals and instructional leaders. We're starting with principal learning. We're collecting data around that learning, and I'm going to share some of that with you today. And we're building capacity and student growth at scale. And when we say the words at scale, that means we don't have pockets of success. We have a school district of success. So we started with the book study. We started with Instructional Rounds in Education, a network approach to improving teaching and learning. This is, it was put out by Harvard. It is one of the best reads that I've ever had. It was eye-opening, enlightening. I see Jenna shaking her head yes. So many of our educators, this is changing the way they're thinking about how we should be supporting and how we're supporting our teachers in their growth in our classrooms. We started with that. And I won't make you read the book, although I would definitely encourage it. If you want to go to the next page. The concept of instructional rounds in education, it was inspired by the medical profession. And I know I talked a little bit about this last time, but I wanted to go a little bit deeper into that. Because I think it's important that we connect the work that we're doing as educators. It's a very complicated profession. Just like medical care is a very complicated profession. There are so many things that our bodies do and how they interact together, just like our learning. So it is based on the medical rounds. If anybody has been in the hospital or seen a doctor show lately, you've seen all of the doctors standing out in the hallway. Now they're standing right in the room with the patients, and they're having conversations about the care of that student. They're observing they're having conversations about what they saw, what they think they should do next. They're collectively coming together because if one bright mind is great, imagine what 10 can do. And that's the concept of the instructional rounds as based on the medical profession rounds. So what is our practice, right? If doctors have a practice, lawyers have a practice, teachers have a practice as well. A practice is a set of protocols and processes for observing, analyzing, discussing, and understanding instruction that can be used to improve student learning at scale. So we're using a developed system to identify how we can observe, analyze, discuss, understand learning at scale. I'm going to tell you 3 things that instructional rounds are not. Because when I read the book, I thought, well, we're already doing this. We've got walkthroughs, we've got PLCs, we've got strategies. Let's put this on our strategy list. That's not what any of these are. If you could go to the next slide, I'll explain. The key idea behind rounds is that everyone involved, every single person involved is working on their practice. Everyone is obligated to be knowledgeable about the common task of instructional rounds. That's why we started with the book study, and we work together and grow together on this. And everyone's practice, and this is very key, should be subject to scrutiny, critique, and improvement. This is true professional development. We've all heard the term job-embedded professional development, right? This is what job-embedded professional development really is. It's learning about something and then coming together as a professional group to apply our learning and talk about how we've learned it and how we can do it better. This is not a sit-and-get professional development. Wayne Westland Community Schools is shifting their thinking on that, and you will see very few teachers and learning professionals going to conferences where we're sitting and getting information. We're looking at our professional learning as job embedded throughout, because this is how professionals, doctors, lawyers, they get better. And to that last point where I said everyone's practice should be subject to scrutiny, critique, and improvement, our kids are, right? Our teachers are. So are our principals, so are our directors, so are our assistant superintendents, and so is our superintendent. So this is learning out in the open. We're going to get there together. So I said they're not walkthroughs. Walkthroughs presume that as instructional leaders that what we're looking for and will monitor, we see that it's there. Little of the walkthrough process confronts us on our own reflection of practice. We bring a lot of biases into walkthroughs, and part of this process that we're going through now is putting those biases aside to understand what are we seeing and what can we do to improve our instruction. The instructional rounds are as much about leaders growing through that process as the teachers that they observe. They're not PLCs. So professional learning communities have so many definitions now, it's mind-boggling. But I will tell you that instructional rounds are not PLCs. They can be a vehicle for the PLC work, and we're going to get there with teachers. We're going to get to the point where our teachers are doing instructional rounds too once we get good, and we can become the professional teachers and facilitators on that. But they're a tool for the PLC to work with, not a PLC itself. And they're not improvement strategies. While improvement will come out of this, without a doubt, it's not a strategy that I can name, I can circle, and I can put down and say, this is going to be the ticket. This is about understanding what strategies we're using and if they're working well or not. This is a way for us to identify that through rigor. Rounds always start with a problem of practice, and that's something that emerges through the instructional process. And I'm saying these things, a lot of times educators don't want to say that there's a problem. Well, there's always going to be a problem, just like in the medical profession, you know? Something's stumping the doctors, they got to get together and figure it out. How can we make this, I've not seen this before, or I don't know what to do in this scenario. We have problems, but we're going to, instead of talk around them, we're going to talk right through them and work together for growth. They're a vehicle for improving. That's what instructional rounds are. So what is this thing I keep talking about, these instructional rounds? As I said, we start with the problem of practice, and this is where educators become, early on, they got really nervous. You mean you want me to tell all my colleagues what my problems are, what I'm not getting right? That was their interpretation of that. And it's a natural instinct, right? Yep, we are. We're gonna talk about your problem. We're gonna talk about my problem, because we all got them, and we gotta figure out how to get to that place where it's no longer a problem, and we can move on to the next one on behalf of student growth. We observe, our observation of practice is part of that, and I'll explain that when we get into it. There's an observation debrief after we've gone and we've observed and we've looked at what the principal has identified as their problem of practice. We get back together and we debrief about it, and we're not nice about it. We are professional about it. We have this. We have the observation protocol where we went into classrooms and we knew specifically what we were looking for. The principal has asked us, this is where my problems are, this is what we're doing about it, tell me, is it working or not? Do you see this? And we're tracking that. And then we're identifying where the teaching and learning is happening on the rigor matrix. And we argue about that because we don't want to give away our DOK 3s and 4s if they're not, because we need to get there. And then from there, we identify the next level of what that work needs to be. Rounds is a learning process. Again, talking about the problem of practice. Most educators are working, for better or for worse, at or near the limit of their existing knowledge and skill. That is not in any way, shape, or form meant to be disrespectful to any of the professionals, myself included, as an educator. I only know what I know. And I need to learn more as our teaching and learning changes, our students change, our world changes. I need to continue to learn as well. And the learning process through rounds will support that. PD alone is not the answer. I've mentioned before, sitting and getting doesn't mean anything if we don't know if we can apply it and we don't have anybody to tell us, yeah, that application did work. And as I had mentioned, even with good PD, we lack the internal structures, process, and norms necessary to pick up that knowledge and deploy it in the classroom. So where is the focus of our rounds? Our rounds are always focusing on the instructional core. And I know Dr. Holt has talked to you about the instructional core. It's embedded in our strategy. It's embedded in our philosophy and our strategic plan. The instructional core is the interaction of content, teachers' knowledge and skills, and student engagement, all around the learning task. That's the instructional core, and that's where our problem of practice will always reside. Only improvement in the instructional core will actually make a difference. And that's an important thing to note for instructional rounds as well as professional growth and student achievement, is that we need to focus within the core in order for us to see student growth and improvement. And of course, improving one element of the core must lead to the improvement in the other two. So task predicts performance. So task, that word is what we see the students doing. So when we go in and we do our instructional rounds, we're not really looking at what the teacher's doing. We're looking at what the students are doing, because that's the indicator of where the learning is at. Teachers aren't doing the learning, they already did that. The students are doing the learning. So we are constantly, that's what we are looking at. We're trained now to look at what the students are doing.
Madam President, can I ask a question, or do we wait till the end of the...
Absolutely. I mean, I'm okay with it.
What comes to mind for me is, how does the teacher engage that student who is just either not interested or for some reason cannot quite take to task what's happening in the classroom, and therefore may become a problem in the classroom?
Sure.
What is the development for that teacher reaching out and engaging that student?
Right. So I feel like you've been planted.
Planted?
Planted.
Okay.
Because you
Must have
just
been the voters.
You just asked, I know, right? You just asked a great question that everything that we're going to talk about today feeds into that.
Okay.
When we move into the behavior coaches, and Dr. Townsend talks about social emotional learning, this process that we're using here is going to be used to support the work through our behavior coaches.
Okay.
Yep. Great question.
My wife thinks I'm planted every time it's time for the trash to come out and things like that, so.
So the ladder of inference in school leadership, this was a tough part when we were learning how to conduct instructional rounds, because as a leader, we're conditioned to jump from the observation of what we saw to an evaluation of the teacher, and that's very stressful for teachers, and that's not what we need to be looking at. We need to be looking at in our instructional rounds what we're doing, and then that will drive what professional learning that building needs to take on in order for them to get to those levels 3 and 4 on the rigor matrix. So we were conditioning ourselves. The rounds process asks us to break that habit by using this ladder of inference, description before analysis. We have to decide what it is. We have to really understand what we just saw and understand it as a group before we can analyze it. Analyst before prediction. We need to analyze that once we understood it before we can predict what's going to happen next. And then prediction before evaluation. So you see there's multiple levels before we get to that evaluation piece. And those multiple levels are what instructional rounds are teaching us to focus on so that we can get to highly effective teachers in our classrooms. The rounds support the 5D process, and that it gives us a tool to consider the effectiveness of our inquiry cycle. I know we've shared that terminology with you before. Through the 5D process, there's an inquiry cycle. Teachers are creating growth plans, and then they're running through an inquiry cycle to see, is what I said I thought I should do to support my problem, my need in the classroom, is it working? So this process helps our teachers as well, because we can then go in using the rounds approach and build our inquiry cycle around this process as well. Once we're done, go back one more, we're going to go to the debrief meeting. This is the meeting that I had discussed a little bit where, things get a little edgy. We come together as professionals and we all observe the same thing. Now let's talk about it. And what did you see? Are you being true to this, or are you using bias from what you thought you observed? Did you jump right to evaluation? And we have small group conversations about what we saw as we moved through in groups. And then we talk to the other groups that also saw those classrooms at different times, but those same classrooms in that building. And we have to justify to them why we rated the DOK level where we did. Give specific examples of this is what we observed students doing. That's how we know it was a rigor DOK 3. And those are great conversations. We've been working on this process over the last 6 months, and a lot of it focused early on that very first step, which is describing what we were observing in non-judgmental, non-evaluative terms. That was really hard for us. We worked with a consultant who is an expert in this, came from Harvard himself, and supported our work in this. And when he first started with us, I was like, wow, I don't know if we're going to get there. But within 3 months of doing this regularly, and this is every 2 weeks we do this with our building administrators. Our building administrators come together, and we go out to 2 specific identified buildings. And then our leaders here at central office also go out separately from them, with them, and then separately again, so that we have more opportunities to practice this. Within 3 months, we were doing it all on our own. Our consultant was able to step back and start working on another path for us on something else we needed, because we didn't need him anymore. We were having those conversations. So we're pretty excited about that. So that led me to what the ultimate question is. What's the next level of work in this classroom schooler system? It's improving that clinical practice. Our job is to make this practice better over time, and it will result in student growth. I wanted to jump to the criteria for useful problems of practice, because that was another area that we really struggled with as educators. You know, we weren't able to name what our problem was, and it's really important. You have to name what your problem is so that you know what to look for to improve upon. So we put some language around that. We defined it. Your problem of practice has to focus on the instructional core. So you can't tell me, well, our problem is that the doorbell rings a lot for entering through the building. That's not something within our core. We can talk about that later, but for the purposes of rounds, we're going to talk about what's happening at the core level. It has to be observable, something that we can see when we go in. It has to be actionable, something that they can improve upon in real time. It has to connect to the broader strategy of improvement, which ties in our growth plans through our 5 dimensions of teaching and learning, as well as our school and our district improvement plans. And it has to be high leverage. It has to be something that if we can get this right, based on our 5 dimensions of teaching and learning framework, we're going to soar. Our kids are going to soar. It's not vague, too vague, but it's also not so specific that it doesn't allow for conversation. I'm going to give you an example. This was one that was just this past April. I just pulled that one because that was the one on the top of my pile. So the problem of practice that the principal identified was that they've been working on developing strategic thinking and reasoning skills at DOK 3 level in our classroom work. So the question was, what does student work tell us about the DOK level in their classrooms, in their lessons? The second was many teachers have posted learning targets. That was a function of their school improvement plan. And it was an expectation of teachers. However, informal classroom walkthroughs were suggesting to this instructional leader that the student work isn't consistently guided by these learning targets. So the question then became, what does student work tell us about the focus of their lessons? So that's what we looked for when we went into this particular building's classrooms. Our rounds team assembled, there was about 20 educators in from different buildings as well as central office, and we reviewed a total of 12 classrooms. And we watch for about 15 to 20 minutes, and we're scripting, and we're observing, and we're looking at what are the kids doing, and we're also comparing that to our DOK matrix. What are we observing? We're looking for DOK 3s. We're looking for examples of that. We're looking for examples of 3s and 4s. Go to the next page, and I'll show you what we found. So this is a matrix that you'll see throughout the building. In next year, when we go into the school year, our buildings are going to be setting up their plan of action of what they're going to be looking for when we come in, as well as what they're looking for when they're walking through classrooms. And principals are going to be developing the data that they need to identify, is it working or not? This was one day. This was one snapshot day. We can't make all of our decisions based on one day of what we observed in a 15-minute session, different 15-minute sessions, right? We have to look at data over time. So they'll be setting this up so that every time they go in, their school improvement teams will be talking about it, their PLC teams will be talking about it. We're hoping to see their goals, their problem of practice, get to where they want it to be so that then they can work on the next problem of practice as a group. So in this particular example, we saw 2 classrooms that were at DOK level 2. That was 17%. We saw 9 classrooms, 75% of them were at DOK 1. We saw one classroom that did not show any DOK levels. Now again, this is a snapshot in time. This isn't a definition of what this building's capacity is for teaching and learning, but this is data points for them to add into their matrix so that they can drive what are they going to do next. The learning target, the second part that we were asked to look for, was we saw it 6 out of 12. So 50% of the time, we observed learning targets that were consistently guided. So the work that the students were doing was consistently guided by their learning targets. That's good. For they had just started on that 2 months before. So the principal was very proud of that. The next page shows, and we're not gonna read this, this is the consultancy protocol.
Sorry, before you go to the next one, when you go back to your, the classroom that had the no evidence. So if DOK 1 is pretty much the basic of the what were they doing?
They probably were in a transition, because we're out in the field in 6 classes, and we're spending 20 minutes per class. We might have spent the first 5 minutes in a transition time from one classroom to
Okay.
another, and then maybe the next 10 minutes, it could have been an advisory class or something
Okay.
like that.
Okay.
But it could also, so another place where there wouldn't have been evidence would be if it was a classroom where kids were copying.
Yeah.
So if kids were copying out of a dictionary, if they're copying notes
That makes sense.
or anything like that, because there's no cognition happening when a child's just copying from one thing to another.
Right. They could have been also assessing.
Yep.
If they were taking an assessment at that time, we're not observing.
So it's based on what you actually see with your
Yep.
physical eyes when you walk into the
Yep.
classroom.
And that's why it's important that we do this a lot, because it's looking at data over time. You know, we look at the volumes of data in order for us to drive, is it working or not? And the consultant said to the group at one time, he said, he goes, if you go in there once and you don't see something, and then you go in there twice and you don't see something, it's different than if you go somewhere and you don't see something after 20 times, right? So it's not happening regularly if over a 20 sample, you're not seeing it at all. So the consultancy protocol, this is where we get so much learning happening. And I talked earlier about, the sit and get kind of conferences where, you're thinking, you're conceptualizing, it's all up here in your head. You're thinking about what you would do, but you're not actually doing it. We actually did this with this principal. This principal exposed their weaknesses to us, and we're supporting them now, and we're talking about, here's some of the things that we've tried. Here's some of the things that we as educators, individual, I had that problem in my building. This is what I did. This was successful for me. So then we compile a whole list through this consultancy protocol now for this principal to have in their toolbox of, I think I'm going to bring this back to my school improvement team. If it worked somewhere else, maybe it will work with us. Maybe it won't, but it's more information for people to grow and learn from. So again, busting open the doors. We're doing this all out in public. Our practice and our learning is done in public. And I think I had mentioned earlier that our building leaders are doing this every 2 weeks. We do this in half-day increments, half in the morning and half in the afternoon. And buildings are now, when we started, nobody was making eye contact with us when we asked for volunteers of can we come to your building? And now we've got people jumping out of their seats. Can I be next? Can I be next? Because the value of it is so great, and on behalf of students. And our teachers wanting to be able to provide the very best that they can for their students. It's, again, job embedded. We're calibrating our thinking together so that we're learning and growing together around RIGOR, 5D, the Instructional Core. And what is coming up next, Dr. Weaver, is we're going to build this building learning into our instructional coach professional learning, and for infusion into what we hope when we're ready to move into teacher-led instructional rounds. Because if this is as powerful as it is at the building leadership level, imagine if our teachers were then going through and using this protocol of observation and having those deep conversations in their PLC groups about what's working in their classrooms and what they can do to improve their instruction. Any questions for me before Jen Curry comes up and dazzles you with our instructional coaches?
Ooh, dazzle.
No
pressure, huh?
That was going through my head.
Right.
It's still.
I will tell you that, we've got some instructional rounds coming up again, and if we have folks interested in joining us, we would love it. The more minds, the better we found with
I'd
instructional
like to be
rounds.
apprised with that date. Yep.
Okay. I'll let you know. And so if anybody would like to ever be a part of Rounds, we are trying to make Rounds a part of the fabric here in Wayne Westland. I'm sure a few of the salient points that she made around not jumping it straight from observation to evaluation. That, for me, when I first learned about this process, was a huge selling point, because as administrators, coming from being just a teacher, you're taught as a teacher to evaluate right after you observe, because that's how we do as teachers. When a kid gives you their work and says that I'm done with it, then you evaluate it, you give it a grade, and you move on to the next one. In leadership, and you're leading people, it cannot be that way. You can't look at something that someone's doing at one moment and then just skip right over to the next and now jump into evaluating it after seeing it once or twice. You need to take some time. Another thing I would like to note for our Board of Education is that the feedback that goes back to the classroom or to the school site, it looks like that chart that you saw in the sample. So there are no teacher names used. It is literally classroom 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, and 12. And we just talk about what area they were in, and then we give that back to the school site along with some feedback notes for them and their instructional leadership team to come together. So we point out and we help to calibrate our vision of how we look at instruction, but then the actual solving of the problems that they see based on their problem practice falls onto the school site. So it's not us coming in and saying, oh, you need to do this now because, we saw X, Y, and Z. No, we all came together as leaders and we're calibrating how we view instruction, so that as you view instruction in one site, it shouldn't look totally different, or you shouldn't have a different type of observation or feeling of feedback or actual actionable feedback, but depending on what school you're in. But you will get some feedback as a school site to be able to move forward with what you need to do with your instructional planning. And so each school site has received, I think, at least one visit this year from the entire team. And some school sites have even already jumped on, well, we want to try it. We want to get a few teachers together and go and see something that we've been working on. And we're encouraging it. We're saying, go ahead. There's no harm in everyone just getting together and trying to look at what does strategic thinking look like. What is strategic thinking? Let's talk about that. Now let's go see it in the classroom. What are learning targets? Everybody has to do them, but what are they? How should they look? How good are they working? And now we're having some really in-depth conversations about what exactly that is. So the conversation has been great. So without further ado, we turn it back over to you, Madam President.
I do like this, thank you, because I can see all of you. I do not have a PowerPoint, but I'm going to walk you through a packet of information.
Hold on one second,
Hold on
Curry.
one second.
She has to introduce you.
Are we, so you guys are tag teaming?
Yes.
Okay, so we're gonna move on to item number 375.18, the instructional behavior coaches, Ms. Curry and Dr. Townsend.
Great, thank you. We're going to start off with the packet. It's included inside of a book with the brochure of instructional coaches.
Looks like this one.
Yes. So I want to thank Ms. Peck for the great segue into instructional coaches, because they are going to be a big part into keeping our instructional rounds going. They're going to play a big part in that within the building, so that we can have instructional rounds fully implemented with fidelity, with the instructional coach being a guide as well. One of the things, too, that we really want to focus on with our instructional coach is personal growth for every teacher, allowing colleagues to connect with each other and a focus on best practices. We have had several committees come together, from our content leaders to our principals to central office staff, to talk about what will an instructional coach do and what will they look like. So I'm going to turn your attention to the brochure that says instructional coaches. I'm going to walk you through this just for a minute or two. And we really defined, and it is a living document right now, because like I said, the more feedback we get, we're crafting it as we go. There will be an instructional coach in each building to begin the school year. But if I can walk you through this, so an instructional coach, we listed the role, the teacher's role, and then the administrator's role. And these three people are continuously working together as a team, supporting each other and supporting students. So the instructional coach will co-plan and model lessons. He or she will collaborate with teachers, provide job-embedded professional development, attend weekly professional learning, which will center around data, coaching practices, the 5D framework, instructional rounds. The teacher's role will co-plan with the coach, collaborate with the coach around the district, building, and classroom data, engage in his or her own learning with the growth mindset, utilize the coach for individual growth. So truly, the teacher and coach will sit down together and it becomes personalized learning for that classroom teacher around the district and school goals. And then the coach is the resource for the teacher. So they're going to build a relationship. It's going to be their go-to person when they really need things. The administrator's role will support the work of the coach and the teachers, allocate time or resources for collaboration, help determine the key instructional focus, which goes right back to the district and school improvement plans, encourage teachers to seek out those instructional coaches and resources. And the coach, though, will not report to the administrator about classroom practice, so it's non-evaluative. It is truly a partnership with the teacher and the coach, so that the teachers can get the personalized learning that they need. And even has a couple more things listed in here. And I just want to point out at the bottom, because we're really determining the coaching priorities based on our district's initiatives and our district's goals. So you'll see school and district data, the HES cognitive framework, the Common Core focus standards, our K-5 teachers, and I know you've seen this book when we did our early literacy presentation. Our instructional coaches at our K-5 level they have this book already in their hands, as do the principals and the teachers. There is another document for 6th through 12th grade coming out this summer that we will share with the secondary level. So the coaches, this is going to be a great resource for them to share with their teachers as well. This just came out last year. So it's new to Michigan, it's new to our district, and new to our teachers. So they will focus around this. We actually, for our coaches, we even created a specific professional learning plan for them. They will be coaching 4 days a week, and they will be in professional learning 1 day a week. So some of that professional learning will include Talk Sense, the literacy essential practices, instructional rounds they'll be a part of as well, which Ms. Peck just talked about. We will also talk around data, and then we want them to drive some of their own professional development. So their PD plan, again, is a working document because they are going to drive some of their work. So we want to give them training, but we want them to be part of what they need as well. So that is a draft, but we have a good portion planned out as we speak, but they will guide some of that work as we go through. The next document, and I just want you to see how it's linked to our 5-year plan. If you look at the second line under coaches, so this is just coded, so in progress, complete, operating with fidelity, and program evaluation. Including this school year, we truly need it'll be in progress for about 3 years. We have to build it. We want it to work. We want to have the people and the administrators and the teachers be part of building that model. So by 2020, we will be operating with fidelity. And by the following year, we will be able to go through a program evaluation. So we've set that up too. We're setting this up for success. We want to do it right. And then last but not least, before I turn it over to Dr. Townsell, we also, and I just gave you a copy that we'll be sharing this with our principals, of a really good article about how principals really boost the impact of coaching. And they play a really, really key part on instructional coaches. And if you just turn to the very first page, there's a great visual right there, and it talks about a coaching focus. And administrators and teachers and coaches, they have to work together, so they are really, really focused in their practice. So they are looking at the district and state goals, right down to the school goals, right down to the content and grade level goals, and they are working together to improve academic achievement and student behaviors, culture, and climate. So it'll all tie together.
Jen, thank
Yeah,
you
you're welcome.
for this. My question would be, in a day's time, in a snapshot of a day, how is all this coaching going to happen? They have their classroom, they're taking home papers at night, they're grading or whatever is happening, how that gets done. When does this intense coaching happen?
So coaches are going to be in the classrooms with them, meaning they are going to be modeling, they are going to be doing some teaching, so the teacher is going to be able just to watch as she is going to listen, as they're going to reflect. So if I am the coach, I would come into your classroom, I would model a lesson, then we could reflect. It could be, truly, it could be on your plan hour, it could be before school, it would be whenever it is convenient for both of us, because we both want this to work, and we want to move kids. And then it could be, now you teach, and I watch, and then we're giving each other feedback, so it's a partnership. So that is truly, that time will be with the teacher and the coach to determine what time that would be that works for them.
Can I have a follow-up? The other thought I'm having here is, we talk a lot about degrees, learning, things like this. So our instructional coaches, are they going to have master's degrees or doctorates, or, in other words, you have to know something to speak into somebody's life. Okay, I'm just putting it as plain as I can. So how is that going to work?
So we did put a preference right away that said 5 years minimally teaching experience with a preferred master's degree, specifically in literacy. So we were very intentional about what we were looking for that reason. We wanted people who are very, very refined in their craft, because they will be working with our teachers, and we want to make sure we're sending in the best of the best.
So just to follow up on the first part of her question, on page 30 of the document that you were, 31, it talks about the coaching practices essential for elementary literacy. And on page 34, it outlines the 4 different types of activities that coaches do to help teachers actually learn. And they are conferencing, one-on-one with them. It's modeling, which is what Mrs. Curry alluded to. It's observing. So, hey, you know what? I've been studying this lesson for a while. Can you come in and see how it's going and give me some feedback on how that looks? And it's also co-planning. So those are the 4 main activities that the coach does, and they do them job embedded. And so sometimes there may be some professional learning that it's happening after school or during professional learning time, but for the most part, this is embedded right and done with the teachers side by side. So it's not an and, it's a with perspective. And this is just because of that exact reason, because we know teachers are already doing a lot, and we want to make sure that we're doing the right things in the right way to get the most out of each and every one of our children. So hopefully that helps a bit as you look at the 7 large areas.
Yes, it does.
Okay.
Mrs. Medell has a question.
When the legislature enacted this piece of legislation, did they include money attached to this? Or is this all on us?
So this is part of, remember I talked about that, 1.1 million, and we had to make some adjustments within 31A. Most of this is on us. We have, as part of the partnership agreement, we applied for a 21H grant. While it does not, while we didn't apply for paying for the actual coaches, we did apply for a lot of the training that's going to have to occur to be paid for by the state of Michigan through our partnership agreement, and we are waiting because we just turned that in. It was due on May 11th. So we're going to find out if we received. We asked for a little over $250,000, if memory serves, and we showed over, I want to say it was over $6 million, if I remember correctly, of match to get the $250,000, because we want to see that we put in our part. We've also partnered with Wayne Risa for some of the coaches training, both our Wayne Risa, and then we are also talking with Washtenaw ISD, who has also done this model and has seen great success. So this is not just a Wayne Westland thing. This is happening all over Michigan, and this is part of why we have now Duke coming in to start off our teacher year next year to talk about this exact concept of focusing on literacy and really getting to that 3rd grade reading expectation. So all of this is enveloped in that. So in answer to your question, no, they did not provide funds, but this is one of those things that we can say, hey, we've adjusted our funds to meet this need. So when that, even if the new 31A legislation comes out, we'll be okay because we've put our money in the right places.
Okay.
Mrs. Madison.
And as far as finding candidates who are qualified, it's a little tricky, is it not, trying to find coaches, because there is no specific degree as to where we could go do colleges to recruit anyone for any type of degree. So it's a matter of just being crafty and finding degreed individuals, such as you specifying with the literacy. There's not anything
There
specific.
there isn't a coaching degree.
Correct.
So we focus on coaching as the skill set, so we try to build the skill set. The great thing is, and as I've said many times in coming here, even from out of state, we have people here in Wayne Westland that are brilliant. Brilliant. And so this is allowing them the opportunity to see what's possible. And with, I think we have 9 coaches that we've identified so far. They've all went through a rigorous application process and been chosen by, I don't want to say a jury of their peers, but a team of their peers. A lot of their classroom practice verified. So we wanted to make sure that the folks that are going to be in the coaching positions are people that actually know how to do the craft well.
So highly qualified could have room.
Yes.
For
It could be,
growth.
it's a range.
Yes.
It's a range. And part of the reason that, and Dr. Townsend will allude to this, part of the reason that we are searching for a higher level of credential with the instructional coaches than the behavior coaches purely has to do with the pool that we have right now. We have a teacher shortage. And so if we're trying to hire teachers for everything, we're going to dilute the pool even more so than we already have. So we made the very conscious decision that our highest skilled personnel should be in the instructional coach role, because they're the ones who are going to be on the front, side by side with our teachers, having that confidential relationship with them where they can feel vulnerable and say, hey, you know what, I don't get this, and I don't feel comfortable telling that to my evaluator or my supervisor, but I can tell that to a coach who I know doesn't have evaluative power over me and has the ability to help. And not only that, do they have the ability to help, they have a network of 20 other coaches they can go to help. And those 20 other coaches have networks of other teachers. So we're literally creating a network of support for all of our classrooms.
Thank you.
These are the job descriptions for both jobs that are being presented,
No, that's on climate and culture, I believe.
okay? Because we have 2 different job descriptions here.
Yes, one is climate and culture coach, and the other is the lead climate coach,
Oh, okay.
Yeah, that's on the
So they don't have
climate.
anything to do with this, okay,
not instruction.
okay.
The instructional coaches, my apologies, I have it here in my hand. So here's the
Okay.
instructional coach job description.
So these are the same.
So the instructional coach is different from the climate and culture coach.
I
So the one-
understand that, but we have
One
2.
says lead.
One's
Okay,
lead and
okay.
one's the climate and culture coach. So the lead is a credentialed person. The climate and culture coach that you'll find is not. And then the instructional coach is a credentialed, preferably master's level with a literacy degree.
Okay.
Understood.
So now it's in there so we can see what the.
Yes, I made sure. My apologies. I had it sitting here the whole time because I wanted you to guess.
Any more questions about the instructional coach before we move on to Dr. Townsend? Perfect.
And I think it's important to note that we'll be in collaboration with other districts that are also moving forward with this. So we've created kind of our own cohort where we can learn. When I say we, I'm really talking about Mrs. Curry and her team can collaborate with other districts who are embarking upon this same endeavor. So we're not alone. And it's great that districts like Washtenaw ISD, Redford Union, other districts are already about 2 or 3 steps ahead of us. So we are learning from everything that they have been doing. And we're also partnered with Nell Duke out of the University of Michigan, who's helping to guide this work as well. So we're making sure that we're surrounded by experts who know what this is supposed to look like.
And the article, which was very thankful, came from Livonia Public Schools, so they've been really, really great as far as helping us out, giving us some tips, and what to do, what not to do, so they get credit for that.
Good article.
Good evening, everybody. So you should also have a packet that starts with the State of Michigan Department of Education, this packet right here. You just see a packet that's not in an envelope or anything. Let me just start by saying I want to let you know why we're going in the direction of climate and culture, social emotional learning. It's important to understand that in 2014, the U.S. Department of Education's Office of Civil Rights, in collaboration with the United States Justice Civil Rights Division, Department of Justice Civil Rights Division wrote a joint letter called Dear Colleague, and it was issued to the federal government. Ultimately, the Office of Civil Rights took data on all 49 million students that were enrolled in public education. What that data found was that 3.5 million students served in-school suspension, 3.5 million students served out-of-school suspensions, and over 100,000 students were expelled from public education. When the Department of Education took a deeper dive, they saw that there was a disproportionality with regards to the young people that were being suspended from school. So what the federal government asked every state to do was to develop and rethink discipline. Michigan's response to rethinking discipline was the Public Act 360 through 366. And that took place August 1st, 2017. It's Michigan compiled law. If you look at the very next page, or flip that over, the Michigan Department of Education has a State Superintendent Strategic Plan, and it's 10 and 10 strategic plan where they specifically identify how to respond to discipline differently than in the past. Now, the second sheet here, this sheet, this is the law. Chapter 380, section 1310 says restorative practices as an alternative or in addition to suspension or expulsion. A school board or its designee shall consider using restorative practices as an alternative. Restorative practices should be the first consideration to remediate offenses such as interpersonal conflicts, etc. Restorative practices mean practices that emphasize repairing the harm to the victim and the school community caused by a pupil's misconduct. Now, I'd like to give a huge shout out to the Department of Education because the government asked the states to respond to this. The Department of Education, we're one of a handful of states that put together content standards based on social-emotional learning. So this color-coded sheet here is from the Collaborative of Academic and Social-Emotional Learning. And if you see, there are 5 core competencies that are outlined: self-awareness, self-management, social awareness, relationship skills, and responsible decision-making. The Department of Education collaborated with CASEL and developed content standards and benchmarks around each grade level and each core competency. Our department, Climate, Culture, and Socio-Emotional Learning, we're aligned with the state's 10 and 10 strategic plan in addressing the discipline issues that are occurring not only in the state of Michigan, not in the District of Westland, but is a theme across the country. We've developed a culture and climate framework. I want to be very clear. The state law talks about restorative practices. Restorative practices, that's a response. When you think of social emotional learning, that's being proactive. You're teaching competencies where our young people are acting differently, where behaviors are reduced and academic achievement is increased. We have a framework for the culture and climate coaches in which each school should get 1 climate coach, with the exception of our high schools where they'll receive 2 because of the size of the schools. And those culture and climate coaches work collaboratively with principals and administration and teachers with building the capacity of our young people and also building relationship or bridging the gap between cultural responsiveness with our teachers. The job descriptions that you have in front of you are the culture and climate coaches' job descriptions and what we like them to do in the school communities where they're serving. In addition to, there's a lead climate coach that supports the central office level in training the culture and climate coaches with working with administrators and students. We have a framework adopted from Safe and Supportive Schools model. Now, Dr. Weaver, you mentioned student engagement, and Rebecca talked about the 5 dimensions, the 5D framework. We work collaboratively and identify and align social-emotional learning with the 5D framework, so the 5 C core competencies. Those competencies will be found within those 5 dimensions. If I'm not mistaken, I think 2 or 3 of the dimensions specifically talk to elements that address social-emotional learning. So student engagement is a huge concern. So if you look at this Safe and Supportive School framework, and some of the introductory level modules, when we bring culture and climate coaches onto our district, there's training that is free of charge that we can use, that the federal government has provided to train climate and culture in our schoolhouses and building the capacity of our educators. In addition to that, we've been working collaboratively with different state organizations or universities such as Eastern Michigan University, who's collaborating or endorsed by the Department of Education, to think about and thought partner around professional development for our culture and climate coaches, in addition to our school building leaders. Last thing I'd like to share with you is an action plan of how do we plan to execute the mission and vision of the Culture, Climate, Social, Emotional Learning Department. And if you turn to the very last sheet, you see an action plan template. Now, there is no cookie cutter way to addressing discipline in any schoolhouse. However, there are best practices and best strategies when putting together a game plan to execute to get the outcome that you'd like to see with regards to academic achievement. All of the documents provided by Wayne Westland, such as our action plan instruction, culture and climate framework, these are all living and breathing documents. We're designing this thing now. We'll continue to design over the summer and have a solid plan moving forward as we approach the 18-19 academic school year. I'm open to any questions, comments.
Dr. Weaver?
Yes, thank you, Dr. Council. I appreciate it. One question that I have is, and I'm sure you're aware by now that I have talked to the superintendent about my concerns as to whatever escalation there might be in fighting in our schools among students. My belief is this, and it's probably dinosaur thinking, so just take it as it is, that students that hit, slap, punch, put their hands on administrators or teachers that are so out of control that they would do that should be expelled from the district. How do you respond to that?
Yes, sir. I'd like to say that the United States Department of Education has put out guidance towards rethinking discipline. And there are definitely some exceptions, such as bringing a gun to the schoolhouse. But the law states that restorative practices must be considered when responding to any disciplinary action.
Yes, and I understand that. But does the restorative practices preclude us from getting to that determination?
It's in collaboration to whatever the process is. It can be used instead of or in addition to.
Okay, let me think about that for a second.
Sure.
Anyone else? Mr. Cox?
I guess I read this 3 times, Dr. Townsend, anticipating your comments on it, and I'd like to talk about exclusionary discipline. And exclusionary discipline, as you have been able thus far to determine, as Dr. Weaver says, in addition to the student who is at the center of the issue, there are 20-some classmates around that student whose workday is being disrupted by whatever activity has resulted in the discipline that's exclusionary. So as we examine what other options we have, I might understand that this system, this approach, is an approach to try to determine how we can administer discipline that doesn't take them out of the school. Is that specifically what you're going to be doing for us, what you're trying to arrange for us, what this entire program is about?
No, that is not true. Specifically, we're looking to build the capacity of our students to be better students by focusing on those 5 core competencies. We know that if our students manage their emotions well under adverse situations, that they will have better outcomes with regards to the situation.
And is it your opinion, by looking at what we've dealt with so far, that if this were to have existed that these students might have other behaviors in school, making it unnecessary for them to be disciplined in this way?
I do believe that if our students master those 5 core competencies, they will be better students performing academically and socially amongst their peers.
When you're looking at the situations that we've been dealing with thus far, is it your opinion that there are students that were unfairly disciplined or that were excluded from classrooms because
Sure.
that was really the only option that administrators had with them?
I understand. Our data suggests that there is a disproportionality with regards to students who are being suspended. The goal is to rethink discipline collaboratively, not only at the central office level, but also with our school building leaders, and think about the best way possible to change the behavior. One thing I see is that sometimes suspensions only delay the behavior. The goal is to change. The goal is to restore the harm that was caused so it doesn't happen again.
Well, you know, we keep using that word disproportionate. Exactly what does that mean?
You want to turn to, let's see how the United
In the
States.
first paragraph, the late Brian Winston says that, and kind of take umbrage at this comment, obligation to review their discipline policies and practices for, quote, unnecessary reliance on exclusionary discipline. Well, if it was unnecessary, what specific student was unnecessarily removed from the classroom? As Dr. Weaver just said, these things have happened in our classrooms. Is the late superintendent suggesting in his memorandum that it wasn't necessary to do that?
I don't think that speaks for all, but I do believe that our educators work with the best intentions in mind. We just want to ensure that everyone's working to the best of their ability around the best practices with supporting our students.
Follow up, please.
Dr. Weaver?
Yes, thank you again, Dr. Townsell. So I'm going to bring my problem back another way. Is there any way to require our administrators and teachers to report when they are hit or punched?
I think that
Is there any way to do that? And the reason I'm asking that question is because many times, because of the love for the students, they let it go by. And I don't think that's fair to the administrators or to the teachers. And so what can we do there? If we can't expel a student for being so out of control that his behavior led him to this, then how can we work from the other end and ask our administrators and our teachers who are breaking up a fight, who are hit, whatever the case may be, to be required to report it, and if they choose to press charges, that's on them, but to report when these things happen?
Sure. I think when throughout an investigation in an incident report that it should just be full disclosure of what happened so the best decisions could be made based off of what happened.
I've read those incident reports, and they are nondescript, to say the least.
So I think it's a good opportunity to train our not only administrators but teachers on just how to respond to discipline when it occurs, fights and all. How do we respond? What's the best way to respond to it? Now, teaching social emotional learning, this is being proactive. Hopefully, if our young people master those core competencies, they might not get to that level of fighting because they manage their decisions. They can take care of themselves. They're aware that they're in a situation that can lead to a severe or dire consequence potentially. So the goal is really developing relationships with our young people too. They have such a respect for that schoolhouse that they don't want to do that.
Okay.
I got a question too, like,
Hold on. Before you,
I had just one more follow-up, and I'm sorry I'm taking so much time. A lot of times you hear out in the district, you hear things, and so I think it's fair to say that maybe the scuttlebutt is, okay, we're just going to take these students who've disrupted my class, and we're going to just bring them right back into the class without consequence, and here I am having to deal with them.
Well, I'd like to respond. I think at the last planning session I was at, data would show that in a lot of cases, more than 50% of the time when students are receiving a consequence, it is a suspension. In some cases, some was 60% of the time. Whatever you did, suspended. So, and that goes back to the theory or philosophy that suspension delays behavior, because if you take another deep dive, there's some students that are constantly repeating the same behavior over and over again. And if it takes 40 times to commit something to an adult's memory, think about how many times it takes to contribute to a young person's memory of how to respond in adverse situations.
Thank you.
Ms. Hines?
Yes, I have a situation. I know of a student, a student, good student, but like she has ADD, but her mom can't afford the medications because they get kicked off of, DHS. So she's constantly getting suspended, due to behavior situations. So with those issues, I know you guys do more with the, helping them control their emotions. Would they help with counseling as well with that, or would they help, helping that family get that type of medical situations contained? Because it's unfortunate that the student misses a lot of school with the suspensions. Eventually they'll probably drop out, so I do get concerned about those. So would that help with those type of situations?
Yes, it will, because the goal is to work collaboratively with a lot of stakeholders in our district, such as social workers and education psychologists, and thinking together on how to support those young people who have medical issues.
Mr. Cox and then Mrs. Madison.
Dr. Townsend, I just want to state for the record